Welcome to Shatter.
She asked it at our shared table, the one we'd turned into a habit. 3 plates, 1 bottle, the same chairs, night after night. She leaned back like she already knew the answer and said, "Are you afraid of losing me to someone else?" Liam laughed at something on his phone, loud enough to fill the apartment. He always did. In our little video studio, he was the guy clients remembered, the director with the smile, the stories, the easy charm. I was the structure. Contracts signed, invoices sent, schedules met. The part nobody applauded. Amy sat beside him, not beside me. Her knee brushed his under the table when she reached for the salt. She didn't correct it. Liam didn't move away. He just lifted his glass like this was all normal. I smiled back at her. Calm. Controlled. Like I was still in the room with them. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't even pretend to joke. I just let my smile sit there, thin and quiet, and the air changed. After dinner, Amy carried the plates to the sink. Liam followed her, leaning against the counter like he belonged in our kitchen. He talked about a shoot we had coming up, a local restaurant chain, easy money. Amy listened too closely, her head tilted, her mouth half open like she was holding back a laugh meant for later. I walked past them and picked up a stack of mail off the side table. The studio card statement was on top. Our studio. Our shared account. My name and Liam's on it. Liam's phone buzzed where he'd left it by my keys. The screen lit up. I didn't reach for it. I didn't have to. Amy's name flashed across the lock screen, bright and clean, like it had every right to be there. A preview popped up, just 1 line, long enough to land. Not in the kitchen. He notices everything. I kept flipping through the mail like I hadn't seen it. Liam stepped back into the room, sliding his phone into his pocket without looking at me. Amy turned from the sink, drying her hands, smiling like nothing had happened. And I smiled back, because in that second I understood something simple. They weren't hiding. They were testing how much I'd take. The next morning at the studio, nothing looked different. The same exposed brick walls. The same cables running under the desks. The same whiteboard filled with deadlines in my handwriting. Liam was already there, leaning back in his chair, feet up, scrolling through footage from our last shoot. He greeted me the way he always did, casual, relaxed, like we had not built this place from scratch together. Amy arrived around noon with coffee for both of us. She used to set mine down first. That day she handed his to him without looking away from his face. Their fingers brushed when he took the cup. Neither of them flinched. It was small, too small for anyone else to call it out. Big enough for me. I stayed at my desk and reviewed contracts for the restaurant campaign. The numbers were clean. The profit margin was solid. Our shared account would receive the next payment by the end of the week. I watched Liam through the reflection in my monitor. He stood too close when Amy leaned over his screen. His hand rested at the small of her back like it had memorized the place. Later, while he was in the recording booth with a client, Amy walked past my office. Her phone vibrated in her hand. She glanced down and smiled in a way she had not smiled at me in months. It was quick, private, unguarded. That evening, Liam clapped my shoulder and suggested drinks after work. He said we deserved it. He said we were killing it this quarter. I agreed. At the bar, he talked about expansion. A second location. Bigger clients. More visibility. He said we were brothers in this. Across the counter, the bartender slid his phone back to him after charging it. The screen lit up before he turned it face down. A photo preview filled the display. It was taken in our kitchen. Amy's hair over one shoulder. His hand on her waist. And the timestamp was from the night I had gone to bed early. I did not confront him at the bar. I finished my drink, listened to him talk about growth and loyalty, and nodded in the right places. He kept using the word brother. He said it like it meant something solid. When I got home that night, Amy was already in bed. The lights were off, but her phone screen lit up the room for a second before she turned it face down on the nightstand. She said she was tired. She did not ask about the bar. She did not ask why I stayed out longer than usual. I lay there beside her and stared at the ceiling. The next morning, I arrived at the studio earlier than both of them. I sat in my office and logged into our shared business account. I downloaded statements going back months. Transfers I had not questioned before now looked different. Small payments labeled as equipment rentals that did not match any invoices. Charges for hotel conference rooms we never booked. I did not assume. I verified. I opened our project management software and checked timestamps on file uploads. There were late-night edits made under Liam's login on days when we had no deadlines. I checked building access logs. His keycard had been used on weekends when I was out of town visiting my parents. I did not need to imagine anything. The data told its own story. Around noon, Amy walked into my office holding a mood board for a new client. She stood too close to my desk, trying to sound professional. She asked if I liked the direction. I looked at the board, then at her. She avoided my eyes for half a second before smiling again. Later that afternoon, Liam forwarded me a contract draft and wrote that he trusted me to handle the numbers like always. I replied that I would. Then I called our attorney and scheduled a meeting to discuss restructuring the partnership agreement. I did not raise my voice. I started moving pieces. The attorney's office smelled like old paper and polished wood. I sat across from him and laid out the documents without emotion. Partnership agreement. Operating agreement. Access to accounts. My signature beside Liam's on every page. I did not mention my marriage at first. I explained that I wanted to initiate a structured separation of shares. Clean. Legal. Quiet. I told him I was prepared to buy out Liam's stake or force a division if necessary. I asked what leverage I had if financial irregularities were found. He read through the statements I brought. His expression shifted, but he did not comment on morality. He talked about clauses, about fiduciary responsibility, about options. By the time I left, the first draft of a notice was already in progress. Back at the studio, Liam was editing footage with headphones on, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had started to move. Amy was perched on the edge of his desk, reviewing color grading. They looked comfortable, familiar. I stood in the doorway for a moment and watched them exist inside something they thought was hidden. That evening, after they both left, I stayed behind. I transferred active client contracts into a separate management file under my direct control, as allowed by our agreement in cases of internal dispute. I scheduled meetings with 2 of our largest clients and informed them that I would be handling their accounts personally moving forward to ensure stability. I did not mention betrayal. I spoke about growth and structure. The next morning, I went to the bank and requested a review of the joint business account. Temporary restrictions were placed pending clarification of certain charges. It was procedural, lawful. When I returned home that night, Amy was in the kitchen, setting the table for 3. She said Liam was coming over to finalize concepts for the restaurant campaign. I nodded, and while she poured wine into 3 glasses, my phone buzzed with an email confirmation. The official notice of partnership restructuring had just been delivered to Liam's inbox. Liam arrived with his usual energy, a bottle in one hand and his laptop in the other. He kissed Amy on the cheek like he had done it 100 times before, casual and unafraid. I watched from the end of the table as he dropped into his seat and started talking about camera angles and lighting setups. His phone buzzed halfway through his pitch. He glanced at the screen and the color drained from his face before he could hide it. He tried to recover, tried to laugh it off, but his voice lost its rhythm. He excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Amy looked at me, confused. I sipped my wine and waited. He came back a few minutes later, jaw tight, movements sharper than before. He said there must have been some misunderstanding. He said he had received a formal notice about restructuring the partnership. He said we needed to talk privately. I told him we would discuss it at the office. He searched my face for anger, for accusation, for something emotional he could push against. There was nothing there. Amy asked what was going on. He told her it was business. Just business. He said these things happen. I watched her eyes move between us. For the first time, she looked unsure. The next day at the studio, the bank restrictions had already taken effect. Payments were pending review. Liam's access to certain administrative controls was temporarily suspended under the clause our attorney had cited. He tried to frame it as overreaction. He said we were brothers, and that lawyers complicate simple conversations. I handed him printed documentation of unaccounted expenses and access logs tied to his credentials. I did not mention the photo. I did not mention the kitchen. I simply stated that until the review was complete, operational control would shift to me. He realized then that this was not emotional. It was structural, and Amy, who had walked in to drop off lunch for him, stood frozen in the doorway as she understood that something much bigger than a secret had just begun to collapse. Word travels fast in a small creative circle. By the end of the week, 2 of our regular freelancers had called me directly instead of Liam. They said they had heard there were changes at the studio and wanted clarity before committing to upcoming shoots. I told them the projects were secure and that all contracts would now run through me. I kept my tone even, professional. At the office, the atmosphere shifted. Liam still showed up, but he no longer moved like he owned the room. He avoided the whiteboard. He stopped leaning back in his chair. When clients came in for meetings, they naturally looked to me for answers about budgets and timelines. I gave them those answers without hesitation. Amy stopped dropping by as often. When she did, the energy was different. Conversations paused when she entered, not because anyone accused her of anything, but because everyone sensed a fracture. She stood beside Liam during one client review, offering creative notes, but the client addressed revisions to me. Later that afternoon, I overheard one of our editors in the hallway asking Liam if everything was okay. He told him it was just legal housekeeping. He said partners disagree sometimes. The editor nodded but did not look convinced. That evening, Amy's sister called her while I was in the living room. I heard Amy's voice rise slightly behind the bedroom door. Her sister had seen the shift online. Our studio website now listed me as managing director. Liam's name had moved lower on the page under creative consultant pending review. Amy came out of the bedroom and asked me what that meant. I told her it meant the structure was being corrected. She searched my face again, looking for anger or desperation. There was none. For the first time, she realized that this was no longer a private triangle. It was visible, and the room that once revolved around Liam had quietly started to revolve around me. Amy started coming home earlier, not because I asked her to, because there was nowhere else that felt stable. Liam had moved into damage control. I could see it in the way he called clients directly instead of emailing them, and how he tried to schedule private lunches to clear misunderstandings. A few agreed. Most told him they preferred to keep communication transparent through the studio's official channels. Through me. At the office, his keycard access was limited to creative suites only, per the attorney's recommendation during the review. He did not argue in front of the team. He laughed it off, said it was temporary compliance. But he stopped lingering in common areas. Amy came by one afternoon while I was reviewing revised contracts. She stood across from my desk, arms folded, as if bracing herself against something she could not see. She asked what was happening between Liam and me. I told her it was an internal audit. She asked if it was serious. I said it depended on what surfaced. She waited for more. I gave her nothing else. That evening at home, she cooked dinner without music playing. The apartment felt larger, quieter. She moved carefully around me, as if testing how close she could stand without being pushed away. I did not push her. I did not reach for her either. Her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at it, then flipped it over without reading it. That was new. Later, while she showered, I packed a small travel bag and left it in the trunk of my car. Not in secret, just not announced. When she came out and asked if I was going to the studio early in the morning, I told her I had meetings. She nodded and said she understood. But as she turned away, I saw it for the first time. She was not confident anymore. She was uncertain. And uncertainty does not look good on someone who used to control the room. The confrontation did not explode. It unfolded slowly in the living room while the city outside moved like nothing was changing. Amy stood near the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching me place a folder on the coffee table. Inside were copies of the restructuring documents, the financial review summary, and the official notice initiating the buyout clause. Everything had been done by the book. She asked if this was about Liam. I told her it was about alignment. She stepped closer and said Liam had called her earlier, saying I was overreacting, that lawyers had twisted normal expenses into something suspicious. She repeated his words like she was trying them on, testing if they still fit. I listened without interrupting. Then she asked the question again, softer this time. She asked if I was afraid of losing her to someone else. I looked at her for a long moment. Not angry, not wounded, just steady. I told her she was finally free. The words landed heavier than any accusation. She blinked, waiting for the rest. There was no rest, no speech, no raised voice. I did not mention the photo from our kitchen. I did not mention the late-night access logs or the message on his screen. I did not ask her to confess. I told her that the studio accounts were being separated, that Liam would receive a formal offer to sell his share under the breach clause, that I would be assuming full control once the review concluded. She asked where that left us. I picked up my car keys from the table. I said I was not fighting for someone who had already chosen. She followed me to the door and said we could talk, that this did not have to end like this. I placed my house key on the entryway console. I told her it already had. Then I walked out, leaving the apartment exactly as it was, except without me in it. I did not disappear. I moved into a furnished place near the studio and kept my routine intact. Morning meetings, client calls, production schedules. The difference was that my phone stopped lighting up with messages from home. At the office, the review concluded faster than Liam expected. The discrepancies in the expense reports were documented. Not criminal, not dramatic, just enough to trigger the breach clause in our agreement. My attorney sent the formal buyout terms. Fair market value, adjusted for losses. Liam tried to negotiate. He asked to meet privately, without lawyers. He said we could fix this between us. He said the studio would not feel the same without him. I told him all communication would go through counsel. I kept my voice level. He eventually signed. His last day was quiet. He packed his camera lenses into a hard case and shook hands with the team. He told them it was a strategic shift. He did not look at me when he left. Amy called me that evening. She said Liam had stopped answering her texts. She said he was overwhelmed and needed space. She asked if I had done something to push him away. I told her I had done nothing outside the contract we both signed years ago. She came by the studio the next day, unannounced. The receptionist looked confused before letting her through. She stood in the middle of the open workspace, noticing small changes. My name alone on the glass door. New access codes. A different seating arrangement. She asked if this was permanent. I told her it was. Her voice tightened as she said she had not expected things to collapse this quickly. She said Liam had promised her stability, creative freedom, a future. I did not respond to that. I walked her to the door like I would any visitor. As she stepped outside, she looked smaller than she had in our kitchen weeks ago. And for the first time, she realized that the triangle had never been balanced. It had only existed because I allowed it. The paperwork at home moved as quietly as it had at the studio. I did not fight over furniture. I did not argue about who kept what. I sent a proposal through my attorney outlining a clean separation of assets. The apartment lease would transfer fully to her. I would remove my name from the utilities. The joint account would be closed after final shared expenses were settled. Amy asked to meet in person instead of letting lawyers handle everything. We sat across from each other at a small coffee shop near the old studio location, the one we had outgrown years ago. She looked tired in a way I had not seen before. Not dramatic. Not broken. Just stripped of the certainty she used to wear like perfume. She said Liam had left the city for another project. She said he needed a fresh start. She said he had not asked her to come with him. I listened. She told me she had thought I would fight, that I would get angry, that I would demand explanations. She said she never imagined I would simply step aside. I told her I did not step aside. I stepped forward. She looked down at her hands and asked if there was still a way back. I did not rush the answer. I told her I do not share my table with a man who sits where I belong. I told her I do not compete for space in my own home or my own company. I said respect is not negotiated after it is broken. She nodded slowly, absorbing each word. When we stood up to leave, she asked one last time if I had ever been afraid of losing her. I held her gaze the way I had that first night. I said I was never afraid of losing someone who had already chosen to leave. Then I walked away, not angry, not loud, not looking back. I did not disappear. I just stopped showing up where I was not respected.